While Bronze Age Greece was typically seen as the age of heroes, what followed after the collapse of Mycenaean civilization in 1200 BCE brought about a period of time marked by social isolation, abandonment, and a general disinterest in art that continues to bewilder scholars, the so-called Greek Dark Age. During this time period, trade can be found only between a handful of cities, and artistic production shifts from figural art to enigmatic geometric designs. Eventually, from the ashes of the burnt-out palaces will soon emerge a handful of city-states that will stand up to a foreign oppressor and give rise to the golden age of classical Greece, to democracy, philosophy, art, mathematics, and culture, some of which we share today in our own Western civilization. During the classical age, architects and sculptors seek to create a sense of visual harmony and vibrancy within their work, to reflect a newfound sense of hope and pride. This tradition is passed down to the Hellenistic age, where a young Macedonian prince, going by the name of Alexander, will conquer the Persians and take Hellenistic ideals with him to the four corners of the ancient world. The Dark Age era begins with a catastrophic event, the collapse of the Bronze Age palaces around 1200 BCE. All major Mycenaean regional centers fall out of use, and we find destruction and abandonment. We also find Linear B, the Mycenaean writing system, is completely lost. No first-hand written documents of any kind appear during this period, and there's almost no figural design in art. Instead, what we find are enigmatic geometric shapes. Then, around 800 BCE, we find new artistic styles emerging, the return of the figural. The real question for us to ask is, should we apply the term Dark Age to this time in history? The geometric style can be defined as one that uses triangles and rectangles, circles and semicircles drawn with a new compass, and multiple brush in dark paint on a light background. So, for a long period of time, there are no human figures or figural images, simply shapes. Towards the end of the geometric, however, we do find the reappearance of human figures on bases. If you take a look at the timeline of ancient Greece, you can see it is divided into 5 distinct periods. The first is the geometric period, following on the heels of the collapse of the Bronze Age palaces. During this time period, we find wheel-spun pottery with an emphasis on shapes such as triangles, menanders, and circles using a compass. Next, we come to the Orientalizing period from 700 BCE to 600 BCE, in which we find imported pottery and pottery bearing Near Eastern motifs such as lions and griffins. Next, Greece's Archaic period from 600 BCE to 480 BCE. Here we find the rise of the Greek city-states. We also find monumental sculpture such as the Kouros and Kore. Next, we come to Greece's Classical Age from 480 to 323 BCE, a time period where Greece is emerging as a world power and experimenting with philosophy, mathematics, and the ideal form. Finally, we come to Greece's Hellenistic Age. With the death of Alexander, we find an interest in not so idealized forms and an experimentation with movement. This will lead us up to the rise of the Roman Empire with the Battle of Actium. Surprisingly, pottery continues to be produced during Greece's Dark Age. Here we have an example of a terracotta figurine found at the site of Lakandi in Euboea, dating to about 950 BCE. As you can see, the face is very human-like, except we have these donkey-like ears. The body of the centaur is adorned with all kinds of geometric patterns: triangles, diamonds, cross-hatching on the chest. The left hand appears to be missing, and this has led some scholars to suggest that, like centaurs of Greek mythology, this one may have been holding a giant tree that he would have shaken and brandished as a weapon. Some scholars have also noted a slight gash in the centaur's leg, leading many to believe this is the mythical Chiron, the centaur who trains heroic warriors, who is also injured by Heracles on his knee. The hole at the bottom of the waist is possibly a relief hole. During the firing process of pottery, it is customary to relieve the pressure built up during the firing process, and so this hole may be that. Is the figurine really a centaur? Here are some examples: 8th century cups recovered from the site of Tiryns that show a central figure who appears to be feeding 2 horses. In the bottom cup, the figure appears quite human with 2 legs. We often refer to this figure as the master of horses or master of animals. But notice the cup above. It appears that the human is attached to 4 legs. This has led some scholars to believe that this is the beginning of the myth of the centaur, perhaps an incorrect interpretation of a human in front of a table. As a matter of fact, it looks very much like a funeral bier that we find on some vase paintings recovered from the site of Kerameikos in Athens. As we've said before, the artistic style of the geometric period was marked by highly abstract geometric designs. In late geometric, vase painting abstract human figures interact with narrative scenes. And during this period, we see an efflorescence of pottery production at centers such as Athens and Corinth. The various shapes of Greek vases developed according to the purpose and aesthetic of their forms. For example, here we have a belly-handled amphora. The amphora functioned as a funerary monument for a wealthy woman. Holes in the base of the amphora allowed liquid libations to be poured into the vase and then into the earth below. The belly-handled amphora was typically used to house the female's remains in a funerary context, while the neck amphora was typically used for storing wine or for the male's remains. Also discovered at the tomb of the rich Athenian lady in the Kerameikos cemetery at Athens is this example of a model of a granary. As you can see, the menander patterns predominate the various granaries. They are open to the air. The suggestion is that a model granary buried with the rich Athenian lady could be used in the afterlife for her to feed on the grain. Another fine example of late geometric pottery is the Diplon vase, also discovered from the Kerameikos cemetery. As you can see, the neck, belly, and foot are covered in geometric designs. What is really interesting is the piece actually is fired in 3 different phases. 3 different pieces of pottery have been assembled here. The potter uses a slip to attach the various pieces. If we look at the designs on the vase, we see that they're predominantly geometric. Again, along the neck, varying patterns of the Greek menander. We even have a procession of gazelles. So a return somewhat of the figural. And again, if we look at the belly, we have a prothesis scene, or a laying out of the body of someone who has died along the belly. Another great example of the return of the figural to Greek vase painting is the Diplon crater. Highlighted along the belly, where the handles are, we have two registers. The upper register features a prothesis, or again, the body laying in state, waiting to be perhaps cremated. In that scene, we have mourners off to the left and to the right, and they're noted by their raised hands above their heads. Below the scene, we have a procession of what appears to be chariots, chariot drivers, and men armed with spears and shields, like what we find in Homer's Iliad at the games of the famous fallen hero Patroclus. It has been suggested that the individual buried underneath the crater was very much a fan of Homer, or at least wanted to be buried in the same style as the Homeric hero. Here's a close-up of the prothesis scene, showing the individual who has died laid out on a funerary bier or couch. On either side, we have individuals which appear to have palm fronds in their hands. What they might be doing is anointing the body. Again, in the farthest corners on the left and the right, we have a procession of mourners, noted with their hands above their heads. You can compare similar scenes of professional mourners in Egyptian tomb paintings. Below the body, it appears that we find animals perhaps being used as sacrificial victims for the deceased. Above the body, we have a checkerboard pattern which may represent a funeral shroud. But to focus simply on vase paintings during the geometric would be a disservice to this period. We also have some fine examples of sculptural works. For example, this figurine of a centaur and man in bronze. As you can see, like our Lefkandi figure, we have a centaur off to the right. He is depicted with human legs at the fore and the back legs as a horse. We believe that this is representing Hercules, who often fights centaurs, based on the fact that each of the figures is wearing a type of military helmet known at the time. Notice that underneath the centaur, there appear to be pinholes. It is possible, and it's been suggested, that this figurine would have been attached to another piece, but as to what, we're not quite sure. Now compare this with the 9th century BCE geometric face. Notice the distinction between the horse and the man. From about 725 to 650 BCE, a new style of painting emerges in Greece, replacing the geometric. One of the most foremost production centers of this time can be found at Corinth. And in Corinth, this style is exemplified by registers of real and imaginary animals, kind of like what we've seen in our Assyrian phase. We have griffins, gazelles, and lions. The source of the decorative motifs on this pottery suggests they could be traced to the arts of the Near East, Asia Minor, and even Egypt, especially with spirals, rosettes, and interlacing bands. This suggests that Greece is conducting trade with these areas. Griffins can be found not only on vase paintings, but on various portable works of art, such as cauldrons and tripods. These pieces would have been featured either at sanctuary sites or placed in the tombs of the deceased. Here we have a griffin protomb This again would have been attached to a bronze cauldron. The griffin's mouth is open as if screaming. Those coming into the tomb would have been frightened off by the hideous image of the griffin. As per Greek mythology, griffins were believed to guard the tombs and treasures of the Eastern world. And here is an example of the griffin protomb attached to a cauldron from Tomb 79 on the island of Cyprus. Again, this would have worked as an apotropaic device, scaring away potential tomb looters. No discussion of Greek graves would be complete without talking about the Koros and the Kore. The Koros would have been placed over a male grave, while the Kore would have placed prominently over a female grave. As you can see, both belonging to the Archaic period, the male figure is rendered in the nude while the female is fully clothed. What is also interesting is that the Koros at this time reflects the canon of proportions and the rigid kind of stance that we are familiar with in Egyptian sculpture. For example, some of the pharaohs. While the pharaohs are depicted partially nude, the Koros is fully nude. Notice also that the Koros has long braided hair and what we call the archaic smile. Again, not a very realistic kind of countenance. Nevertheless, it is one that the Greeks have borrowed from Eastern and Egyptian sources. Now, I love this quote by Hippocrates: "Life is short, but the art is long." Inarguably, one of the most important events in all of Greek history was the Persian invasion of 480 BCE. Previously, the Greek city-states of Athens and Eretria had supported an unsuccessful Ionian revolt, or the revolt of many Eastern Greek cities, against the Persian Empire of Darius the Great. While Darius managed to capture the eastern Greek cities, the western Greeks managed to escape. It was up to his descendants to eventually bring a second Persian wave to Greek soil. During the second invasion, we see the destruction of Athens and the Battle of Salamis. We also see a major change in artistic styles, such as here at the Temple of Iphaea at Aegina. Take, for example, this sculpture from the west pediment of the Temple of Iphaea. It's a Greek soldier, twisted over, and he looks very much like the Kouroi that we've seen previously. The feet are not quite rendered as realistic as we might come to expect in Greek art. The hair is rendered with long locks, and he retains an archaic smile. Compare this to the dying warrior from the temple's east pediment. It's a marked transition from the archaic to a brand new, exuberant style called classical. Instead of propping himself up on one arm, this warrior responds to the gravity of the situation and his dying body. He's hanging from his shield while he attempts to support himself with his other arm. He also tries to prop himself up with one of his legs, while the other one has fallen over the side. His muscles are contracted and limp, depending on which ones you're looking at, and they seem to be buckling under the weight of the man as he is dying. His face, looking down, is perhaps contemplating the final moments of his life and his honor. Another really good example of that transition from archaic to classical art is the Critias boy. This is a marble sculpture dating to, again, 480 BCE, so just after the Persian encounter. And what we see here is one of the earliest examples of the contrapposto pose, that is, putting most of your weight on one leg while the other one drapes behind. Again, this is an attempt to create a kind of more realistic or naturalistic figure. Notice also that the hairstyle has changed. We're no longer using those long braided locks. The archaic smile has changed a little bit. It's, again, a little bit more realistic. And this is a great way of segueing into a discussion of man as the measure of all things. This is a new canon of proportion, and we will see that Greek architects will pick up on this and try to measure temples in the same kind of way, where man, at least using the human foot, the human arm span, will be used as a measure for temples. And just a few years after, the sculptor Polykleitos perfects the human form in his sculptural work, the Doryphorus, or spear bearer. Here, again, we see that contrapposto pose in this marble statue. And this is probably a copy of a Greek original. It may have even been bronze, but what we would expect to see is the sculpture holding an actual spear. Because it's missing, it may have been metal and melted down for other uses. Look at the attention to detail, the musculature, the attempt to make this figure more naturalistic, real, as though he is coming toward us, approaching us. Again, many figures that we find in the ancient world, especially of athletes, were used as dedications by athletes in gratitude for winning some major event. And this may have been the case here. Again, if you were to compare Polykleitos' Doryphorus on the left and the Kuros figure on the right, you can see the clear differences between the classical age and the age that came before it, the archaic age. While the right is more stiff, the left is more realistic, more engaging. As a side note, the Doryphorus will serve as the model for later Roman sculpture, including the famous Augustus Prima Porta. Augustus uses the Doryphorus as an example of the best of the classical age in order to adopt that same kind of theme in his own golden age of Rome. Of course, the piece de resistance of Athenian sculptural art is Myron's famous Discobolos, or discus thrower. Here we have an amazing athlete frozen in time, about to launch his disc across the field. And although this is a very demanding task, the sculptor has shown him unusually relaxed and unrealistic. Even though the form is so realistic, we have this contradiction. Shouldn't he be out of breath, straining? That's not what we have. So also notice that behind him we have what appears to be a tree stump. This is called a support. And while a lot of bronze sculptures could be soldered to the base, a lot of marble sculptures could not. And so the support suggests that this is a copy of a bronze original. Nevertheless, it does not take away from the engagement and the sheer amazement of this statue. I think this is the perfection of the human form and basically what the Greeks are trying to do with sculptural arts to show the beauty of the human form in all things. Another fantastic example of classical sculpture is the Artemisian Zeus, or possibly Poseidon. And I say that because scholars seem to argue over what the statue originally was holding, whether it was a trident or a thunderbolt. And the argument goes that if it were a trident, it would have been too top heavy. If it were a thunderbolt, it would have been ridiculously small. So there has been no settling the argument. But suffice it to say, the statue shows an improvement, again, in human anatomy and flexibility. And again, what we're seeing here is a figure that is moving through space with the slight lift of the right leg. It appears as though he is about to step forward and throw whatever it is he's holding. And this could only be achieved really through the medium of bronze. If this were marble, you probably would have to have some sort of support. But if you did have the support, it would be hard to see the foot lifting off the ground. So this is really one of those examples where the medium really makes or breaks a piece. Another rare instance of a surviving bronze statue is the famous Riace warrior, one of two that was recovered off the coast of Italy. It dates to that transitional period between the archaic Greek and classical Greek sculptural style. And you can see that with the idealized geometry and human form, the alluring realistic surface of the piece. Um, it has a contrapposto pose with the weight on the back legs, which makes it appear more realistic, as though it were stepping forward towards you. And again, the musculature is clear, yet not incised. The bronzes turn their heads in another attempt at expressing movement to the viewer. The asymmetrical layout of their arms and legs also adds another level of realism. The eyes are formed from calcite, maybe originally supposed to be ivory, while the teeth are made from silver. The lips and nipples are made from copper. And at one time, they would have held spears and shields, which have not been found. But it's more than likely that these would have been metal as well. But of course, the greatest achievement of Greece's classical age was the rebuilding of the Temple of Athena Parthenos on the Acropolis in Athens. Made entirely of marble that had to be imported to Athens, it is by far the prime example of a Greek architectural perfection. What we see is not what we see. The base of the temple is actually bowed or curved, and it's done so in order to create an optical illusion, to create the illusion of straightness. But as many archaeologists have discovered, if you were to place an object at one end of the stylobate, that is, the base of the temple, and go to the other side of the stylobate, the object would disappear. The columns represent vitality, perhaps reflecting a new age of Greece. You can see them straining to keep the roof of the temple up. That effect is called entasis, where it bulges at the middle and slowly gets slimmer as it pushes up towards the top. And the idea is, yes, there's a vitality even in our architecture. Now, as you can see, the temple is in ruins, of course. It has been subjected to torment throughout the ages. The last insult was, of course, it was used as a storeroom for the Ottoman Turks for their artillery and was hit by a cannonball, which caused it to explode. The resulting fragments were picked up by a British aristocrat named Lord Elgin, who takes them back with him to England at a very small fee. Those marbles are at the center of a major debate that is still going on today. Who owns the Elgin or the Parthenon marbles? The British or the Greeks? Of course, no discussion of temples would be complete without talking about the classical order of column capitals. Capitals are, as the name implies, the tops or crowns of columns. The Doric order come from mainland Greece, and they're the simplest of the orders, characterized by short, organized, heavy columns with plain, round capitals or tops, and no base. The Ionic order came from Eastern Greece, where its origins are intertwined with the Aeolic order. They're distinguished by their slender, fluted pillars with large base and two opposed volutes, also called scrolls, in the top of the capital. The Corinthian order is the most ornate of the Greek orders, characterized by slender, fluted columns, having an ornate capital decorated with two rows of acanthus leaves, or four scrolls. The acanthus leaves were an idea that originated with Callimachus, an architect who saw acanthus leaves in a nearby graveyard and was struck by their beauty, perhaps new life coming out of the old, and so used it in his architecture. And here we have a model of Athena Parthenos, created by the sculptor Phidias. This is what would have been inside the temple, and all Greek temples are homes of the gods. The sculpture would have been ivory and gold, hence the term chryselephantine. As you can see, the Athena is holding what appears to be a Nike or victory statue in one hand, her right hand, and in the left she's holding a mighty shield. She also has her telltale spear. Below her we have a procession of what appears to be Athenian citizens. The three goddesses, if we can call them goddesses, from the east pediment of the Parthenon represent examples of wet drapery. Again, this is more interest in realism and rendering realistic clothing by having the drapery or the clothing of these goddesses cling to the bodies. Here we have an example of some of Athens' mythology, the battles of the Lapith and Centaurs. The Lapiths being a specific group of people, the Centaurs being a specific group of non people or other. And that's a term we use for anyone who isn't a city dwelling or from Athens. And so it shows the struggle between the urban center, civilization, the Lapis, and the wildness of the natural world, or the centaurs. And this also records, of course, many other myths. Hercules might come up in the conversation when talking about centaurs, or, of course, the famous mythological figure Chiron, who is a centaur who trained some major Greek heroes. Of course, not all scenes are mythological, and here we have an east frieze from the Parthenon showing Athenians going about their daily business. The entrance to the Acropolis was controlled by the Propylaea. Though it's not a fortified structure, it was important that people had a place to come to that were not ritually cleansed, and so this would have been the first stop for travelers or pilgrims. The Temple of Athena Nike, built around 420 BCE, is the earliest fully Ionic temple on the Acropolis. Sculptures from the friezes have been salvaged and show the deeds of Hercules, the statue of Muscophoros, a damaged sculpture of a goddess credited to Praxiteles, and the Battle of Plataea. Also recovered from the parapet around the temple is the ancient goddess Nike adjusting her sandal, now housed at the Acropolis Museum. What is most interesting about this relief, again, is that wet drapery look, which is another innovation from Greek sculptors trying to attempt a new kind of realism in their art. The Erechtheion, a temple dedicated to Athena and Poseidon, and the work of the sculptor Phidias, was employed by Pericles. Its most notable feature, of course, are the columns that are sculpted to look like maidens. And again, the idea is that they are carrying the weight of the temple's roof on their heads. Who is Erechtheus? Erechtheus was a legendary king mentioned in Homer's Iliad as the ruler of Athens during the Archaic period.